take a few minutes to review simplifying radicals. Now, first of all, this symbol can be called a square root symbol, but it's also known as a radical. The term underneath it is known as the radicand. So we have the radical, which is the symbol itself, and the radicand is the term underneath it, or the thing that we are taking the square root of. Now remember, the definition of a square root means we are looking for a number that will square, or that will multiply by itself, to equal the radicand. So in our case, 6 times 6, or 6 squared, gives us 36. So that means the thing that squares to give 36 is 6. The square root of 36 is 6. Another basic example would be the square root of 100. What is it that multiplies by itself to give us 100? Well, 10 times 10 is 100, so the square root of 100 is 10. Now, unfortunately, not all numbers are quite that nice. There are things that we can take the square root of part of, but not the square root of the entire radicand itself. So an example of that would be something like the square root of 8. Well, off the top of my head, there's not an integer I can think of that will multiply by itself to give us 8. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, but no integer is going to square to give us 8. Therefore, the square root of 8 is not a perfect nice integer. However, if you think about things that we can take the square root of, we can break this down into 4 times 2. And 4 is something that you can take the square root of. The square root of 4 is itself 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. Therefore, the square root of 8 is 2 square root of 2. Another example would be the square root of 72. Well, 72 can be thought of as 36 times 2. Well, what multiplies by itself to give us 36? 6 does. So the square root of 36 is 6. There's not an integer that we can think of that will square to give us 2. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. There's no way we can take the square root of 2 and get a nice integer, so we leave that under the radical. So the square root of 72 is the equivalent of 6 times the square root of 2. Let's do one more. 3 square root of 32. Well, 32 would be the same thing as 16 times 2. If we think about 16 times 2, 4 times 4 is 16. That means the square root of 16 is 4. We already had a 3 outside the radical, and now we're bringing a 4 to join it. We cannot take the square root of 2, so it stays under the radical. To finish simplifying, all we have to do now is take the 3 that was already outside the radical, multiply it by the 4 that we got when we took the square root of 16, and that gives us 12 square root of 2. So even if the number that you have under your radical, your radicand, is not a perfect square, if it is composed of something that is a perfect square and something that is not, you can take the square root of part of it, and anything that's left over simply remains under the radical.